Imagination is a powerful thing, a construct of not only our thoughts, memories, desires, and even fears, but one that is duly rooted in our creativity, passions, and dreams. As children, our imaginations run rampant, creating worlds of our own, constructing them out of the familiar and the mundanities of our daily lives, as well as the fantastical things that we learn about, both from reality and from fiction. The concept of a child getting lost in a world of their own imagination is nothing new, and one of the most popular and important pieces of literature actually tackles this as its main theme. Lewis Carroll's timeless novella, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, explores this idea, with Wonderland embodying this very concept. It's the all too familiar story of the titular Alice getting lost in a dream and seeing the surreal and uncanny under a whimsical lens of childlike wonder and nonsense, guided by the mysterious and mischievous Cheshire Cat.
You may have noticed that I'm not all there myself.
The story can be sliced up and interpreted in many ways, but the key takeaway here is that it demonstrates the vast and vivid worlds a creative child can create in their own head, and, in many cases, how quickly our own imagination can turn against us. Creativity is an attempt to resolve a conflict generated by unexpressed biological impulses, such that unfulfilled desires are the driving force of imagination, and they fuel our dreams and daydreams. In the landfill that is gaming, there do exist many different titles that tackle the idea of dream worlds, some more obtuse and odd, entailing an imagination more abstract in nature, like the ever-infamous LSD Dream Emulator, where not much concrete can really be gleaned from it. It's a mess of random encounters and surreal imagery, occasionally dipping into the darkness to startle the player, but ultimately, there's very little substance to gather than what we see in the abstract. Another example would be Yume Nikki, where, like Wonderland, there is a named character who is the root of the visages that we explore, giving us more contextual roots to draw our conclusions from. And like Lewis Carroll's story, it stays in the abstract and surreal, but lets on enough for us to formulate our own ideas about what it all means and what it's trying to say. But there is one game in particular that did take this a step further, even tackling it as a direct sequel of its source material, and that game would be none other than American McGee's Alice.
Poor dear, after all these years, maybe that old rabbit will bring her around.
American McGee's Alice is a game that took the framework we started with, the idea of a childlike imagination being a powerful force that can create its own world, and flipped it on its head, asking the question, what would happen if that imaginary world turned against you? It shows us a violent and twisted version of Lewis Carroll's psychedelic classic, where Wonderland is no longer a representation of just Alice's imagination, but now a manifestation of her inner sanity. The story that entails is a simple yet compelling one. After an accidental house fire takes not only Alice's home, but burns her beloved family along with it, she's left in a trance-like state of shock, an orphan locked in an asylum, and a shell of a person. Her former haven of color and hope, now a portrait of abstract horror. Throughout her 10 years locked away and subjected to torturous mistreatment and abuse, she's locked away in the prison of her own imagination, with the game's story telling of her defeating her inner demons, personified as her former imaginary friends, and her original antagonist, the Queen of Hearts, being the root of Wonderland's corruption. In other words, a manifestation of Alice's lost sanity. Upon defeating her, not only is Wonderland returned to the peaceful refuge that it once was, but Alice finally awakens from her mental abyss, freed from the confines of the asylum. The game's ultimate goal, outside of being a fun third-person adventure game, was not to just take a classic children's tale and make it a grimdark experience for edgelords, much like myself, but it was designed to explore the idea of our minds being turned against us. I talked about it in much deeper detail in a previous video. So, then why am I bringing all this up again? What am I leading into? Well, I'm glad you asked. I wanted to follow up on that same idea of how powerful a child's imagination is, and just how terrifying it can be once it's introduced to some traumatic experiences and becomes corrupted. So let's ask an even more pressing question. What would it look like if an adult's imagination was corrupted due to traumatic experiences? And what if that struggle for sanity wasn't only an internal one, but imparted to us by malicious actors? Madness Returns is the sequel to American McGee's timeless classic, and rather than tread familiar ground, it opts to not only expand on the concepts and story of its predecessor, but take the entire idea into an even deeper abyss. It's a game that not only tackles the idea of its titular character once again fighting to maintain sanity, but topics such as PTSD, exploitation of the mentally ill, repression and the toils that can take on the human mind, and at the game's heart, deception and manipulation by those we are meant to trust and take care of us, all wrapped up in a beautifully stylized package of a familiar childhood world. Madness Returns conveys about all of its prominent themes from the word go, but rather than giving an exposition dump in the vein of a JRPG or just hoping that you played the first game and have the basic idea of what it's going to expand on, the first 20 minutes of Madness Returns gives us a masterful setup that not only introduces us to the story and mechanics, but one that teaches us how this whole experience is going to work, all while allowing us to sink into a state of immersion. The first thing that we see upon starting the game is its take on key cinematics, a paper cutout theme that not only alludes to the literary roots of the characters and their world, but also recaps the events that have taken place and how they might have affected Alice herself. Her Wonderland is now a hell, a place of despair where at any moment violence can break out and horror can take hold, conveying to us just how unreliable and shaky her sanity has become. Despite overcoming the heart of darkness and regaining her sanity enough to be freed from the asylum in the first game, her mind is still haunted by the past, and her PTSD still holds her hostage, showing that even with how far she has come, she's still suffering from the scars of the past. Once the scene passes, we get our first glimpse at the game's graphics and art design, seeing Alice and her psychiatrist Dr. Bumby, who seems to have a bit of a fixation on getting his patients to forget their past traumas, rather than just push past them. Our first hint that things might not be as they seem, planting the seeds of doubt and suspicion without having to say a single word about the matter.
Who would choose to be alone, imprisoned by their broken memories?
I'll set you free, Alice. Memory is a curse more often than a blessing.
So you've said many times, and
I will say again, the past must be paid for. Now, before our next session, collect those pills from our high street chemist.
Very well, Doctor.
The first thing that you might notice is how washed out and desaturated the world is. And as we explore the orphanage, this only becomes more apparent. Seeing the orphanage also gives us a hint that Alice's circumstances of being here is strange as well, considering that she's a 19-year-old adult and not an adolescent child like the rest of the patients who stay here. While on the surface this is far from the hell pit of Rutledge Asylum, there's still something very off about the whole thing. There's clear signs of neglect, no joy to be found in any of the building's inhabitants, and it's just a miserable and depressing place overall. And this only becomes more clear as we exit the building and wander outside.
Another day, a different dream, perhaps.
The world Alice lives in is cold, cruel, and malicious. Just walking these brown, sepia-soaked alleyways, seeing the grotesque look of many of the merchants hanging around it, it doesn't really make for all that warm of a welcome.
That'll teach him. Beat him good. Move along, Alice. I can run you in just for being off your nut.
Though props to the art team for getting an accurate depiction of British teeth. It takes this a step further as soon as we get past our first alleyway and we're greeted by drunks and prostitutes. Their sunken-in faces and painfully exaggerated corsets give us an idea of what their life's path has done to them. It all leads us to the cat we began our journey chasing, where we see just how broken Alice's mind still is. Hallucinating Jabberwocky-faced men grabbing at her and actively distressing her, only for it all to disappear once a different menacing figure pops up. Pris Witless, a former nurse from the asylum. Witless is our second example of somebody who should be showing us support, giving us a very different interpretation of who they're actually supposed to be. Witless blackmails and extorts money and booze from Alice, rationalizing to herself that she's a good person for helping her out, and even flaunts that Alice would be forced in a position to be nothing more than a trick or prostitute to be sold to the highest bidder if it wasn't for her help. Once this plays out, and we get a bit of a key observation from Alice after looking at a pigeon cage, the game truly gets started as Nurse Witless transforms into a monster, and we descend into the Vale of Tears, our first true glimpse at Wonderland.
Pretty birds, like you.
And here, everything that we had just experienced is contrasted with vivid and vibrant colors. The Vale of Tears is an absolutely stunning place. It's full of childlike wonder and fantastical creatures, even portraying sadness in an artistic and wondrous way. This opening tells us a lot about the journey ahead. It masterfully sets up what the story is going to focus on this time around as well. Alice 1 had a deep focus on mental schism. It was Alice overcoming the insanity that had festered within her, and when we got through it all and saw her finally leave the asylum in a much better place than she was before, it felt earned. It makes Madness Returns' opening all the more powerful, because rather than undermine her mental state and just throw her back into an asylum,
make Wonderland a hellscape again and shoehorn her into another adventure. The story shows a lot of maturity in that. While yes, her recovery did happen and that hopeful ending still stands, the reality is that PTSD and trauma don't just go away and can take years, if not decades, to overcome. If you live in an ugly, unforgiving place where those who are supposed to care for you more or less exploit you and your trauma for personal gain, it's only a matter of time before the scars of the past begin to remanifest. This is exactly how Madness Returns kicks off its adventure, using a show-not-tell approach to give us everything we need to understand what is going to happen and how this is going to work without spoiling any of the future story events. We get to see and experience the world for ourselves before falling headfirst back into the madness. Where the vibrance and beauty continue to fade, the deeper we walk. Then the more callbacks that we see, the more the world twists and contorts into the nightmare it once was. It really takes its time to get fully distorted, and this allows for what is a relatively slower paced introduction to be all the more meaningful, allowing the environment to tell the story. To give a seemingly odd comparison, Madness Returns takes many of its cues from Silent Hill. Now, bear with me. I know that this is a weird thing to bring up, but it's not as odd as you might think. Both games play on the idea of liminality and crossing between the thresholds of two worlds. In the case of Silent Hill, it's the fog and otherworld, where here it's Victorian London and Wonderland. Both titles will have us go back and forth from each world throughout the game, with sections where they will inevitably bleed into one another and use their environments as a vehicle for storytelling. If we compare the introductions to both Madness and the first Silent Hill, they're almost mirrors of one another. Both have our protagonists wander a dirty and decrepit town, where the environment and its inhabitants show us what kind of place we're actually in, without directly using dialogue to convey any of it. Both games have us follow a figure we're chasing, only to have it lead down a dark and dangerous alleyway, where liminality comes into play and we cross a threshold, and both introductions conclude with our protagonists being ambushed by otherworldly monsters. And the Silent Hill comparisons don't even end here. In the Vale of Tears, we are granted our shrinking ability, and it's quickly shown that this is going to be much deeper of a mechanic than what we would think initially. Not only does it allow for us to get into otherwise unreachable areas, but spots that might seem like a pile of rocks or a wall will now reveal themselves to be secret areas that can contain teeth, health, and memories, as well as revealing hidden messages and chalk outlines of invisible platforms that can be used to get to seemingly out of reach areas. While these hidden messages are not as direct or poignant as what can be found in the Silent Hill series, they do serve a similar purpose, warning us of character encounters, enemies, and even foreshadowing events at times. To simplify it, the game is telling us that the environment is a character in itself, and the way it looks is set up, and how it has us proceed is intentional beyond just gameplay. A more direct example of this comes as we make our way toward the end of the Vale of Tears, and we see mechanical flowers sprouting out of the grass. From a glance, they might look like a bad texture, but once you get up close and take a look at what the flower is made of, realizing that it's gears, it hints not only at the area that we're headed, but also the character that we're going to meet. If you did play the previous game, seeing a lot of gears and industrial imagery is a dead giveaway that we're entering the Hatter's domain. And as we get further and further away from the Vale of Tears and closer to the Hatter's domain, we see as the colorful and vibrant world of Wonderland is being corrupted into a similar desaturated state as the real world. Just in this case, it's deep shades of red, black, and gray. It's also here where we find the main enemies that we're going to fight throughout the game, which are these sludgy blobs with doll parts, pipes, and screws built into them. Something very divorced from the traditionally wonderlandish creatures that we fight. This contrast is only continually built upon as we get deeper into the game and face enemies that match with the areas they belong to. But these enemies, called ruins, are the main constant that we come across. After the masterful introduction, we make it to the Hatter's domain, and discover that not only does Mad Hatter need our help, but he's also friendly. And this indicates another running theme in the story. This is not the first time one of our former foes has become an ally. Even the Duchess became this and even gave us our pepper grinder. And much of that is simply down to the fact that this story is not about Alice's own struggles for sanity. It's not an internal conflict to this time. More so, it is a conflict regarding the poison that others inject into her. If we take a closer examination at those ruins, their symbolism becomes pretty cut and dry. The sludge that they're made from, combined with their doll parts, gives it away pretty easily. The goop that they consist of is moldable and changes form depending on the creature, with us meeting various versions of these ruins throughout the game. But what tells us most about them is actually their weakest and most base form. Something that looks a lot like a leech. And I believe this is a visual allegory for what the ruins symbolize. The ruins are parasites, and given the real-world villains that we face here, a leech is honestly the best parasite to represent the adversity that Alice faces. Throughout history, leeches have been seen in a dichotomous way. On one hand, they are bloodsuckers, using us to grant themselves nourishment and life, stealing from those that they can sink their teeth into. On the other hand, they're also seen as medical tools, animals that can be dangerous if not used properly, but one seen as helpful and even life-saving in certain situations. There is a practice called bloodletting, and it's been used for hundreds if not thousands of years. Bloodletting was the name given to the removal of blood for medical treatment. It was believed to rid the body of impure fluids to cure a host of conditions.
Originally, bloodletting involved cutting a vein or artery, typically at the elbow or knee, to remove the affected blood. Over time, specialized instruments and techniques, including the use of leeches, were developed to make more precise cuts and improve control over how much blood was removed. Blood was typically drained until you passed out, which for most people amounted to about 20 ounces of blood.
If we look at Dr. Bumby, Nurse Witless, and even lawyer Wilton Radcliffe in particular, we can see a clear allegory forming. Dr. Bumby is a psychiatrist who is meant to help Alice process her trauma and find greater stability as she recovers from her past. But rather than help her actually cope with things, he does his best to hypnotize and manipulate her, attempting to bury her memories and overall just make her forget, trying to hide something that could be compromising. Nurse Witless, who is meant to be a caretaker for Alice during her time at Rutledge, now just blackmails and demeans her for her own personal wealth and need for liquor. Wilton Radcliffe, the former family lawyer for the Liddells, wanted to take advantage of their tragedy by using the family deaths and Alice's mental troubles to attempt to get her inheritance. He is even the one responsible for stealing her stuffed rabbit, more than likely in an attempt to cause her further mental despair, as it's an important memento to Alice's past. Like the leeches, each of these characters is meant to play a healing role both metaphorically and literally. But just like the actual practice of bloodletting, there are times when things can go completely wrong.
Outside of the problems directly related to blood loss, bloodletting, especially using items like animal teeth or sticks, could lead to severe or even fatal infections and the transmission of bloodborne diseases.
The ruins are a representation of a fatal infection. This is confounded by further revelations that can be made during our time in the Hatter's domain, aside from just how fun the combat in this game is. Deception and betrayal are at play here. Both Dormouse and the March Hare have betrayed not only the Hatter but Alice herself, as it's revealed that they are partly responsible for allowing the Infernal Train to destroy Wonderland and its inhabitants, though information on just what it is and who is controlling it is not given. The Infernal Train is seemingly the root cause of Wonderland's corruption and the ruins that we have been fighting throughout the game. In a sense, it is the representation of the previously mentioned leech, and the ruins are the infection that it spreads. As we move into the next section, we begin to see an even clearer picture of the world this game has been presenting to us. Alice returns to the real world briefly before being sent back into Wonderland yet again, and it's this section of the game where one of the most important aspects is put into clear contextual view. Now, the underwater section of the game is honestly my least favorite part, and while it can feel like an endurance round of doing a bunch of assholes chores,
I can't hear my notes. The pipes are obstructed.
I can see that. Why not do something about it?
And endanger my vocal cords. You might do it for
Everyone
me.
here has an excuse for doing nothing.
there are two major takeaways from this section. The train is unstoppable because she cannot remember the reason why it exists, making the constant hunt for our memories throughout the game more poignant than before. For us as the player, they are collectibles and used to justify the treasure hunt of exploration and get some more lore. Whereas to Alice, they are fragments of memories that she has lost, scattered across her broken mind. The puzzle pieces that she needs to figure out just what's going on. The other takeaway here is actually in this small snippet we see of the Carpenter show. Just about the entire time that we spend in the underwater section of the game, we're going around and collecting the various performers and people we need for Carpenter to put on his show. And the one we spend the most time and the most grief working for is the Oyster Starlets. The game really makes it seem like they're going to be this big integral piece to whatever Carpenter has planned, only for the main star to almost instantly be crushed by Walrus, who wastes no time in taking center stage, only to then begin eating the others not long after. This can easily be seen as just a shocking situation to present the player before having Carpenter reveal the info that we needed so our plot can keep going. But given the game we're playing, we can probably assume it's not nearly that shallow. If we compare this to the real world, it more so directly points to the fact that here in this world, and not just Wonderland, but the game's world at large, there is no value or concern for women, and it actively sees them not only as objects, but as collateral. In the opening of the game, we are introduced to prostitutes on the street looking as miserable and disgusting as possible. Witless justifies her actions by claiming that without her we would end up a trick, a fate even Alice's nanny had fallen into, and before being attacked by Jack Splatter, she beckons Alice up to her room to join her. And if all that wasn't direct enough, there is the fact that the sailors who save Alice from drowning in the river do so intending to take her back to a room to have their way with her unconscious body.
Got my very own ribbon then.
Saints be praised that he works in mysterious ways. You got plans for her?
Take her over to the Mangled Mermaid. Rent a bed.
Hard to woo a girl, Mr. Brawl.
Do you think you're doing?
What comes natural like?
Not natural to me. Get away.
What makes this more disgusting and disturbing is the passive nature of the entire encounter, where Alice simply tells them off and leaves, and they just kind of let it happen. these weren't seasoned predators on the hunt, as much as they come across as people who just saw an opportunity to seize. An action held with about as much regard as when you walk down the street and just see $1 that someone dropped. All of this paints the picture that women are not seen as people, they are commodities. And if you yourself are a woman and you find yourself in this world, it is one you must venture with haste and caution. Now, let's take a step back, because I do think we need some added context here. Madness Returns takes place in Whitechapel, London during the Victorian era. This setting is important for a few different reasons. Whitechapel was a slum-ridden shithole, where many worked hard labor for extremely low pay, creating a vacuum of poverty, homelessness, and crime to become status quo. Just by looking at these pictures, you can see how harsh a community it must have been to live in. And given that during the 19th century, populations would be steadily rising, it would give way to even greater desperation from those trapped in the trenches, with large families struggling to make ends meet and cramped into small living spaces. Many women would end up turning to the oldest profession in the world and sell themselves out. Jasmine Patel has a great piece on this that sums it up in a couple of paragraphs.
The area was a dismal place loitered with criminals and alcoholics. Farr suggests that the financial standing and advocative natures of parents in the area was a major reason as to why parents sold their daughters to brothels. In an instance described by William Steed, author of Maiden Tribute of Modern Babylon, the parents of the daughter that had just been sold accepted the situation with indifference. The procuress, who was well up to her work, took her away, washed her, dressed her up neatly, and sent her to bid her parents goodbye. The mother was so drunk she hardly recognized her daughter. The father was hardly less indifferent. The blatant selfishness and neglect of the family in this incident shows how easily the prostitution industry was able to survive and thrive in the East End at this time. Families fueled by alcoholism showed no remorse for the children that they betrayed. Consequently, these children that grew up in prostitution were often used as breeders. The daughters that prostitutes had were often born into prostitution. Their childhood usually consisted of serving the brothel, doing housework until they were an appropriate age to be marketed as virgins for profit.
Whitechapel's real-life lore obviously goes much deeper than just this, but for our case here, this is the important piece of the puzzle we need to understand Alice's world. I mean, this was the era and place where Jack the Ripper was actively committing his depraved murders, and in Madness Returns, we even have a bit of homage to him with Jack Splatter. So to sum up what we really need to know from all this, Alice lives in an area and era defined by its poverty and disposition, where women and children alike are nothing more than a commodity. As the story goes on, it quickly shows us that it hasn't really revealed its full hand yet. Upon waking back up and being saved from the fire from Nan, Alice resolves to find out the truth behind the fire by seeking out Radcliffe. Entering his house, we can see that it's fully furnished, and he's upstairs filing papers. Once we talk to him, he remarks about how all Alice cares about is the fire, and despite him previously assuming that she played a bigger role, he opted with the official story about the flames being caused by the family cat spilling a candle. It's pretty obvious that he only plays into that belief out of convenience and just dismisses Alice's rebuking of the cat's involvement and even the supposed confessions that she's made regarding her own. But considering Radcliffe was just trying to abuse the situation to get her inheritance, it's not too hard to see why he might be an unreliable source of information, regardless of his authority and important role in not just Alice's life, but society at large. But after the cutscene plays, Alice awakes in a seemingly abandoned house, with no sign of Radcliffe or her stuffed rabbit. All the furniture is gone, the house is decrepit and abandoned, looking like it had been years since anyone else lived there. The bait and switch is so abrupt and strange, it's hard to tell what's happening, at least until we step outside. And what seems to just be London at first reveals itself to be something far different. As we walk just a few feet outside the door, we see this. A statue of the mock turtle. And just like that, we've left the real world. As we make our way down yet another alley and see liminality once again take hold, as we pass through its threshold, we're left with this. Once again, we've ended up in our dissonant and destroyed mind. The brilliance here is that on one side of this, we see how untrustworthy and unreliable Radcliffe, and for that matter, all the other characters that are meant to help and protect Alice, seeing them for the villains that they really are. Yet, on the other side of the coin, we're shown how truly unreliable a narrator Alice actually is herself, as the line between imagination and reality continues to blur. But to make this reveal even more brilliant is what happens as we step towards the edge, and once again we see the hellish train pass through the sky, and as we have a spat with Cheshire Cat, he says a line more poignant than any other so far.
To hell.
You're not that good a liar, and I'm not that stupid. But something a bit less calamitous would have been welcome.
This unmitigated disaster is your doing, and it will get worse. Your train keeps a hellish schedule. Get moving. Time waits for no one. The change has begun.
The train is perfectly capable of terrifying me, Cat. You should find another job. Is there really so little hope?
There's even less, and if fear paralyzes you, we are lost.
And after that, we see the level's title card, The Veil of Doom. The stark contrast of where we started, the beautiful and wondrous Vale of Tears, now an apocalyptic and oppressive void, drained of its color and vibrance, only for the enemies that we fight here to be various flavors of ruins, with the small leech-like ones being the most common. If we take a step back at how this whole transition to Wonderland began, it's a clear case of a PTSD trigger and onset hallucination.
Dissociative behaviors and hallucinations are often reported in trauma-exposed people with schizophrenia spectrum disorders and post-traumatic stress disorder. Auditory hallucinations are the most commonly reported type of hallucination, but often co-occur with experiences in other sensory modalities. The phenomenology and the neurobiological systems involved in visual experiences are not well categorized. Are these experiences similar in nature, content, or severity among people with schizophrenia and/or PTSD? What are the neurobiological bases for these visual experiences, and what is the role of dissociative behaviors in the formation of these experiences? A study by Warren and colleagues in BJ Psych open amid to characterize the phenomenological systems in groups of people with PTSD, schizophrenia, or both.
This excerpt is from the National Library of Medicine, and if we take the violence and fire enacted at the brothel and our face-to-face meeting with Radcliffe, it shows that these situations trigger Alice's PTSD and cause her to fall back into Wonderland, with it not only being more and more corrupted every time that we go back, but our hallucinations bleeding more and more into the real world.
Experiences of dissociative behaviors largely overlap with the spectrum of psychotic experiences and have been associated with worse outcomes in PTSD. The relationship between trauma, PTSD, and psychotic disorders has gained interest, with a diagnostic subtype of PTSD with psychotic features being proposed. Not surprisingly, people with PTSD, especially those reporting severe dissociative behaviors, also experience psychotic symptoms such as hallucinations, and dissociative behaviors can mediate the impact of trauma on the occurrence and content of hallucinations in people with chronic schizophrenia spectrum disorder. But in people with a first episode of psychosis, another recent study also indicates that although dissociation may mediate the impact of trauma on hearing voices, it does not explain all hallucinatory phenomena in trauma-exposed populations, with or without a diagnosis of schizophrenia spectrum disorder. Most studies have focused on the experience of auditory and verbal hallucinations in PTSD. These hallucinations have been reported in 20 to 58% of veterans with combat-related PTSD, and in 67% of people developing PTSD following civilian trauma. Although auditory and verbal hallucinations reported in PTSD are mostly similar to those reported in schizophrenia, they can also differ in some ways, such as their presence, theme, nature, associated delusions, egosyntonic characteristics, and/or subjective distress. Less evidence is available on other hallucination modalities experienced by people with PTSD or schizophrenia. However, as hallucinations are likely to be multimodal psychotic features reported by people with PTSD and high rates of trauma exposure are reported by people with schizophrenia, one may speculate that hallucinations of other sensory modalities are likely to show similar patterns of similarities/differences to those observed with auditory hallucinations.
I think it's pretty clear how this relates to what's going on with Alice. The traumatic experiences she's been through have torn her mental state to shreds and left her a broken person. And given that 90% of her interactions involve people directly related to both the asylum and the investigation of the house fire, it's only natural that the stress of seeing and interacting with people like Witless or Radcliffe triggers Alice's PTSD. What makes this all the more powerful story-wise is that once we see just how far gone Alice's mind has become, we spend our time in the Vale of Doom searching for Caterpillar, a character who has almost always served as a voice of reason for Alice. Where Cheshire Cat serves as more of a guiding role to Alice, Caterpillar is a character who opts to ask the hard questions and challenge her, in a way, teaching her how to both overcome the obstacles in her way, but also adapt to the difficulties that she faces.
Usually he seems to bring how neatly splits his claws, and welcomes little fishes in with gently smiling jaws.
As Alice continues to search for Caterpillar, the next big area of the game is the Oriental Grove. During this part of the journey, we finally get to see some answers and truth behind many of the events that have been at the root of our adventure. One of the key observations of this area is that not only is it decorated similar to how Radcliffe's house was, but also it's one of the most uncorrupted levels of the game. While its inhabitants are being slaughtered and sieged by samurai wasps, for a good chunk of this area's playtime, we fight little to no ruins, and the black and gray hue that's infested just about every other area is pretty scarce throughout. The Oriental Grove is seemingly one of the few places where Alice's mind is still relatively intact, and because of this, we finally access a repressed memory that begins to make our world crumble. This is due to Alice's previously mentioned PTSD. For many who have suffered severe abuse or traumatic events, especially during childhood, repression or partial amnesia is relatively common. Sometimes specific details, sometimes entire events. They can just be forgotten. But rather than erased, they are memories that lay dormant beneath the surface, just waiting for a time to bubble their way back up.
Since 1980, dissociative amnesia has been listed as a common symptom of PTSD in every edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, Psychiatry's Diagnostic Bible. The condition has been backed up not just by psychiatric case studies, but by dozens of studies involving victims of child abuse, natural disaster, torture, rape, kidnapping, wartime violence, and other trauma. For example, 2 decades ago, psychiatrist James Chu, then director of the Trauma and Dissociative Disorders program at McGee Hospital, published a study involving dozens of women receiving inpatient treatment who have experienced child abuse. A majority of women reported previously having partial or complete amnesia after these events, which they typically remembered not in a therapy session, but while at home alone or with family or friends. In many instances, Chu wrote, these women were able to find strong corroboration of their recovered memories.
As we get closer to Caterpillar, one of our memories awakes, and that suspicion that we had about Radcliffe falsely believing the narrative for convenience is all but confirmed. Alice remembers that she didn't forget a candle down in the library, and even if she had, Dina the cat wasn't down there to begin with. She was with Alice in her room. And when the fire eventually started, Dina was also the one who showed her how to escape the flames. And the only candle that was actually left lit in the house was one in the hallway, left as a nightlight. This changes the framework of not only Madness Returns, but especially American McGee's Alice. Knowing that the fire wasn't started by Dina, given Alice's time at the asylum, the abuse that she faced, the death of her family and her current life, it all had a different origin point. And if not started by our beloved cat, then by who? What really makes us hit even harder is that it's only after we regain this memory that the ruins begin to appear, and more leaks of that black viscous sludge begin to spill into the Oriental Grove. Once we finally reach Caterpillar, we get yet another key piece of dialogue.
My memories are shattered. This wicked train has ruined nearly all I can recall. And Wonderland will perish completely as I lose my mind. So much has changed. I can't help Wonderland if I can't help myself.
Much has changed, but you've got it backwards. Save Wonderland and you may save yourself. The carpenter was onto something, but he was hiding from the real. Your goal is to accept it.
Where should I go then? What should I do?
The Queen must be served, Alice. The Queen in all her guises must always be served.
He all but confirms that the information we seek and memories we've been searching for are deeply repressed, and that it's up to us to remember, and it's not the train's doing. Hinting that if we see the Queen, the antagonist of the previous game, we might finally find answers. He even hints that she's someone who represents a person very important to us, only for Alice to then wake up in the real world. But again, she descends into the depths of her mind, this time not even lasting more than a couple of minutes. It's apparent that the closer Alice comes to unraveling the truth, the more she continues to descend into her madness, and the more the parasitic corruption takes hold of her mind. Yet the closer we get to the Queen of Hearts, the more that Alice recalls her past. And once again we arrive. We finally leave our history of repression behind and begin our journey to reclamation.
Back to admire your handiwork, returning to the scene of the crime.
It had to be done, Cat. You said so yourself. You and this Red Queen cannot both survive. She is a cancer in your body. Excise her or perish.
Well, she was the face of evil in the heart of darkness.
The Queensland is one of the best chapters of the entire game, and maybe even the entire series. In many ways, it serves as a love letter to its predecessor. It looks the most like Alice 1 in terms of its aesthetics and level design, and even the enemies you face here are the undead versions of the previous game's card guards, now zombified versions of themselves. When Alice first enters the castle, she's greeted with a painting of the Queen of Hearts' former glory, where she sits in resemblance of herself before transforming into the Heart of Darkness. Something to take note of here is that during our time in the Queensland, the gameplay style shifts quite a bit, harkening back to the puzzle platform roots of the first title, but also introducing a lot more horror elements, such as chase sequences and endurance rounds with the Executioner, a guard who rarely comes out of his hole, let alone pursues those who escape him. Yet in this case, Alice was special, and as she gets closer to the Queen, so does the desperation of the guards. This level is also where we reclaim yet another memory, this time recalling that Alice's sister Lizzie didn't see a use for locks, and her room was not only further from the supposed source of fire than her own, but Lizzie also knew how to escape, indicating that someone must have subdued or trapped her sister, and this person must have been the arsonist. As you can see by the cutscene, the game's not just hinting at the truth, but flaunting it. If we compare Alice's demeanor throughout the entire game and how she's really changed as a character, up to this point she's persisted but stayed in the realm of fear. Been more of a deer in headlights sort of characterization, desperately trying to find a way to change the impending doom ahead. But now that she returns to the residence of her former antagonist, and holds almost all the pieces she needs to complete the puzzle, Alice begins to reclaim her spirit, letting fear go in favor of determination to save Wonderland and in turn save herself. That confidence coming with each memory she frees from the repressive void of her mind. And once Alice finally breaks through the Queen's defenses and gets to the Queen's quarters, everything finally begins to unravel. And as such, Alice enters the belly of the beast, both figuratively and literally. As we make our way deeper into the heart of darkness, upon meeting the Red Queen, we see a far different figure than what came before. Gone is the monstrous embodiment of insanity, and in its stead is a young girl with hair and eyes matching that of younger Alice. And through our conversation, it all really becomes clear. When Alice originally repressed her memories and her PTSD took hold, the Queen of Hearts tried to overtake her mind. She is the part of Alice that wanted to let it all go and find refuge in madness rather than deal with reality. Just another piece of her psyche that was trying to find a way of protecting itself, even if it was misguided. But even now, as Alice is attempting to put those pieces together and find the truth, the Red Queen reveals that her fixation on just finding the truth was blinding her of a more important one.
I may survive here, but you're finished. You see the pattern of destruction? I know you do. The train is trying to destroy all evidence of your past, and especially the fire. Now, who would want that? Who benefits from your madness?
The destruction of Wonderland is the destruction of me.
Indeed, and vice versa.
I've set it in motion. I can derail it. This is good for me. I'm not insane. I didn't kill my family. I am fine. I'm not mad. I'm innocent. I mean, not guilty. What's happening? What are you doing?
The train must be stopped, but there's more to do. Your view conceals a tragedy. The whole truth you claim to see eludes you because you won't look at what's around you.
At the edge of finally having all the puzzle pieces together, Alice seemingly cracks and wakes up back in the asylum. Bald and demented, she walks the halls dazed. The horrors of Rutledge have returned, the threats of lobotomization, and nothing but indifference from all those around her. It's even here where we get confirmation on the metaphor of the ruins. as Alice is forced to undergo a bloodletting procedure, having leeches forced onto her body to siphon her blood, even at the risk of infection. And if we combine this with the previous scene of her having a hole drilled into her head to quote-unquote make room for the trouble, well, it's all starting to come full circle. All the previous allusions to bloodletting, PTSD, and psychosis, they're all here and fully explained. And it's after these reveals that we get what's possibly the most important one thus far. Witless and her opportunistic greed, justified by simply doing her job, Radcliffe's negligence, Nan's bitter indifference, but most importantly, we get...
Come now, Alice. Am I not to be as much honored and obeyed as the Queen? Is that asking too much? I want what she wanted. Give yourself over to that. Trade the tentacles for the train. It's altogether a better ride. It's that, or back to Rutland.
The confirmation at its root. The source of the infection, the mother leech, Dr. Bumby, and his infernal train. And with that, we seemingly leave the nightmare, a hallucination of terror and revelation. Alice now sees those who have taken advantage of her insanity and deep-rooted their poison into her. And just to call back to another previous point, we have our fog-laden liminal space, a Silent Hill-esque scene to cap it off, as we make our way through the fog and see the last piece of the puzzle, a dying child, killed at the hands of Wonderland's new tyrant, a force far more evil than the Heart of Darkness. And with that, we make it to our final chapter, the Dollhouse. The Dollhouse is a disturbing and deeply uncomfortable part of the game, because it's where things become far more twisted than they already were. The environment is made of toy houses, cardboard boxes, and doll parts, all contorted into a confusing maze, as if hell was a Fisher-Price landfill. Worst of all, there's a constant voyeuristic feeling to the entire thing, with eyes and faces in every corner, almost every piece of furniture. No matter where you are or what you're doing, there's always something watching you, like a stalker in the night, or a predator lying in wait. The further we explore, the more we see just how rotten of a place this really is. Like when we meet a group of mutilated children, held up in a house, who beg for our help before we are attacked by a giant doll. And upon fighting her, we strip her of her clothes, revealing an exposed human heart at the center of her porcelain body. It's really, really uncomfortable. But it's only after we kill her that things really come into perspective. Alice's reward for victory is a passage through a mutilated crotch of a doll, and the unnerving view in front of her really puts it into a clear picture. The missing pieces, the predatory imagery, the fixation on lost innocence, it all wraps back around to the idea of victimized children. The deeper we descend into the depths of the dollhouse, the more disturbing and forward the game is with its reveal. While it might seem out of nowhere, there are signs pointing to this littered throughout the game. The childlike imagery we see in the early stages, the brutal way women are treated in the world around us, and especially that disgusting insinuation that Nan gives as she takes us to Radcliffe's house. And just before Alice finally comes face to face with the doll maker, we unlock our final repressed memory, the one that allows her to see him in his true form. The man responsible for starting the fire and slaughtering the Liddells was none other than Dr. Angus Bumby. And not only that, But the key he uses to hypnotize his patients into forgetting their pasts is the same key from the house, the one for Lizzie's room. Bumby is the ultimate evil a child could face. Not just a wolf in sheep's clothing, but a predator in disguise as a doctor, a practitioner of recovery who preys on the weak and the unable. His form as the doll maker, while disturbing, keeps his resemblance more clearly than any other character in Alice's mind, an indication that the monster she already sees is him. This is also where all that sexual imagery comes full circle, as Alice realizes that what Bumby has actually been doing is using his orphanage to brainwash the children in his care, and weaponizing his therapy sessions and hypnosis to steal away their consciousness until they're fully under his control and ready to be sold. If we reference back to that article from Jasmine Patel, it spoke of parents selling their own children to procuresses, and the callous nature that they held to the entire situation. So if parents during this era were willing to sell their own flesh and blood for stale bread and a few pence, what about predatory guardians tasked with caring for mentally unwell orphans?
I provide a service. In the great and awful metropolis, appetites of all sorts must be gratified.
My family, my mind, the infernal train.
The train is your invention, your defense. I merely set its schedule and itinerary. The train is coming with its shiny cars, with comfy seats, wheels of stars. So hush, my little ones, have no fear. The man in the moon is the engineer.
As Alice re-enters reality, she sees the ghosts of the children corrupted, her fellow victims to Bumby's abuse. And when she confronts him at the station, he admits to all of it, flaunting his pride for his crimes, and even gloating on how Lizzie was asking for what happened to her. Even Alice is just another project under Bumby's belt, a remnant of a mistake he made, allowing her to survive after torching her entire family. Once more, the revelation also brings what is an often overlooked piece of storytelling, one that's just lying in our HUD. Alice's health is a bed of roses, or a bed of flowers, and as we take damage, the petals come falling, and when we die, we lose them completely. If we fail, if we die in Wonderland, then we are deflowered. A genius bit of foreshadowing of just what will happen to Alice if she loses her mind. Alice, now on the infernal train, sees all her friends as passengers. But it's speaking to the Red Queen again that we finally get the game's final twist. Something we probably all guessed by this point, but here is the confirmation.
You shouldn't ask questions you know the answer to. It's not polite. And that noise wasn't Lizzie talking in her sleep.
Oh, no! Oh, poor Lizzie!
And there are no centaurs in Oxford. Make your survival mean something, or we are all doomed!
The night of the fire, and the reason the Liddells burned, was because Bumby raped Lizzie and wanted to cover his tracks. Alice, locked in the asylum, was never meant to be released. Her insanity was a happy accident that kept any risk to Bumby's empire of abuse trapped in a straitjacket. The only reason an orphanage for children would house an adult woman was simply to keep his house of cards from toppling down and to brainwash Alice into forgetting forever, encasing her in the void Bumby had trapped so many others. Upon defeating the doll maker, Alice finally has all that she needs to stand up to Bumby once and for all, and with a single push, he meets his end by an oncoming train. A fitting conclusion to the conductor of her insanity. And with that, the game finishes out, with Alice's worlds becoming one. Now let's circle back to the beginning. At the start of the video, I asked the question, what would it look like if an adult's imagination was corrupted due to traumatic experiences, and what if that struggle for sanity wasn't only an internal one, but one imparted to us by malicious actors? And well, this is it. Alice had her mind deeply distorted and demented at the hands of those who never cared for her in the first place. Her family killed, her normal life stolen, all because a man with a modicum of power thought his hellish desire and selfish gain was far more important than the lives of those around him. Unlike the first game, where Alice fights the part of her mind that seeks oblivion as a means to escape, rather than sanity and a cold, harsh reality, Madness Returns is all about what happens when our care and recovery are placed in the wrong hands. The heart of the story lies in the relationship of Alice and Dr. Bumby, though its side characters and villains represent a different aspect of abusive authority. Nurse Witless is the complicit. She blackmails and extorts Alice, but who's to say she's the only one that she does this to? And if Witless is the one who got Alice a place at Bumby's orphanage, who's to say she isn't responsible for supplying him with children? Our former nanny is a representation of negligence. While not outright evil like the rest of the cast, Nan is definitely a victim of circumstance who chooses to turn a blind eye to those around her. She sees the evil that exists in her world. She points to the ills of others, but in her own head she justifies the despair that she has herself fallen into. And when faced with someone in front of her on the brink of falling down that very same pit, she ignores it and even outright justifies it. On the other side of the coin, we have Radcliffe, the lawyer who abuses his authority to pursue personal riches. Even though he knew the official story was bullshit and doubted it himself, he again resigned himself to neglect the truth in favor of greed, hoping to take advantage of a mentally ill victim just for a small sum of cash. Dr. Bumby is all three of these in one. He not only abuses his authority to take advantage of the mentally ill, but he is also negligent to the needs of children, turning a blind eye to his duties as a therapist and psychiatrist, as well as he is complicit, another man feeding the beast of the prostitution industry, sacrificing the sheep who have the misfortune of ending up in his flock. Madness Returns is a game about abusive authority and the atrocities that can be done at the hands of those with power. It also has a lot to say about the exploitation of not only children, but the mentally ill, the weakest and most vulnerable in society. Peoples whose voices are often neglected due to the fact that without someone of authority protecting them, they are powerless to help themselves. But it's also a game that shows just how blind we can be when we get lost in our own worlds. Alice was oblivious to the obvious. The truth was around her the entire time, but in her delusional search for answers, they always eluded her, because while she spent all that time digging deeper and deeper, she failed to realize just how close it really was, ignoring the literal keys jingling in her face. And because of that inability to see the truth that was right in front of her, it allowed for her mind to be exploited, and for the infernal train to ravish not only memories but the sanity she fought so hard to keep during her time at Rutledge. Also, it's what kept her blind to the crimes of Dr. Bumby. Even though deep down she knew the truth, that he was a rapist, he was a murderer, those memories were buried with the same part of her mind that once tried to entrap her in madness, now being the one to break the news to her. It really recontextualizes the first game. Maybe the Queen of Hearts chose insanity because she herself couldn't handle the truth. And given that the truth is the horrifying reality that is survivor's guilt among both murder and CSA, well, I can't say I blame her. But what is honestly the most haunting part of it all is that in regards to the use of CSA and pedophilia, Alice in Wonderland is actually not far removed from the subject.
Only a handful of people would have known at the time that Charles Dodson, a maths don at Christ Church, Oxford, was also Lewis Carroll, and that the inspiration for the book was a real Alice, Alice Liddell, the Dean's daughter. For years, the relationship between Carroll and Alice Liddell has been the subject of speculation.
Alice Liddell was a real person. A real child the adult Lewis Carroll would spend his day with. A family friend of the Liddells, Carroll would often spend time and photograph their children, and obviously, his fondness for them went beyond just that, as he immortalized Alice in his writings. But as scholars and journalists have parsed through his journals of photography, many uncomfortable revelations have come to light, with this more questionable and predatory aspect. From his nude photography of the Liddell sisters, cut pages of his diary revealing he was courting Alice's older sister Lorena. While speculation on just how far that rabbit hole of Lewis Carroll's perversions go, or if he really was a predator, I can't help but see a possible inspiration for Dr. Bumby, as his own affections match up, just taken far further and used as an allegory for the wicked and horrifying way these sort of things were handled in the Victorian era. But anything beyond that is just pure speculation. Madness Returns is not only a one-of-a-kind game, but it's one of my all-time favorites. It's a dark and twisted tale that uses something as fantastical and childish as Alice in Wonderland to speak on important topics often left to themselves. And it's a journey I highly recommend you take on your own. Now, before we end the video, let me just say a heartfelt thank you to those who keep the lights on and support my content. I couldn't be more grateful that there are people willing to pay me to make these videos and delve into things like this. I know it took a while for me to get this out, but I wanted to make sure I did it its justice, as Madness Returns is not only one of my favorite games, but I think its story is incredibly important, and the fact that there are people who stuck around with me while I worked on this. So to you all, I say thank you. And if you would like to see your name appear as well on the Wall of Shame, or just show support for what I do, you can support me on Patreon or Ko-fi. It all means everything, and I couldn't thank you enough. But with that being said, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, and I'll see you in the next video.